I've had a lot of people ask me how to make sourdough bread, and they want to come over and learn and have me show them, but it's something that takes a couple of days, and then people generally don't want to sleep on my couch and watch dough rise, so it's perfect though for videos. And I'm going to make a series of videos about how to make sourdough bread, how to make your own sourdough starter, and how to cook with it. So today I'm going to be showing you how to make my standard sourdough rounds. And there's probably a French name for that, but I don't know what it is, and I'm probably not doing it the French way. But these are the tools that you need, and most people will probably have all these things at home already. So I like to cook in a nice Dutch oven. So if you have a heavy-duty cast iron type of Dutch oven, I also I'm making 2 loaves. So I'm going to cook my other loaf in this stoneware pot. You'll need to have a bag to put it in when you're done. So when you have your store-bought bread, you save the bag. While it's rising, you'll need to have something to put it in to rise. So I have a giant bowl that I do for the first rising, and then I have 2 containers that I'm going to do for the second rising. I have some smaller containers that I'm going to measure things into. You'll need, when it's rising, you want to keep it covered, so you need a lid, or you need a towel to put over it, or whatever you have. It could be plastic wrap, which I have here. And depending on what you're using to cook it in, you might want some parchment paper. You'll have to have a scale. If you're really going to make bread well, you have to do it by weight, not by volume. And then a bench scraper is really handy to help you with dealing with sticky dough. Of course, a wooden spoon, a sharp knife, measuring cup, measuring spoon. I have different kinds of flour here, salt, my starter, and a pitcher for water. And those are the things that you need to make sourdough bread the way I make it. And I'm going to get started. So every good baker is a chemist. And as a chemist, you will take lab notes. I keep my lab notes on my iPad. Okay, I have a document in Google Docs that I just keep track of what I'm doing and how it works out. I also have a paper notebook that I write in. But today I'm going to be using the notes on my iPad to make this bread. And I'm going to show you a recipe that makes 2 loaves, almost a kilogram each, but not quite. And we're going to start by measuring out all-purpose flour. So I want to measure it into here. So I'm going to put it on my scale and then turn the scale on and make sure that the scale says 0 with your bowl or whatever on it. Otherwise, you'll have the wrong amount. And I'm going to measure out 700 grams of all-purpose flour, okay? So you just scoop it out until it says 700 grams on your scale. Try not to spill it. $702, take a little bit out. $6.99, 700. Okay, now I'm going to take my 700 grams of all-purpose flour and put it in my giant bucket. Now, I'm going to measure out 126 grams of whole wheat flour. This whole wheat flour is some that I grew from wheat that I grew about 2014. It's a Sonora variety. What did I say? 126 grams. Okay. 128, 29. But you don't have to use wheat that you grow yourself. You can use wheat from the store. Whole wheat flour, 126 grams. Now I'm going to put in 50 grams of rye. I did not grow this, but I did mill it. $50 grams right here. All right. I have all my flours. Now I have to get some water, and you want it to be hot water, okay? So let me make sure I get hot water. Oh, so first I use a big pitcher, and I put it on the scale, and I press the button that zeroes it out. It could say tare, I don't know what the button says, but make sure that it says 0 with the pitcher on it, okay? You need about 684 grams of hot water. 618 grams. We'll add a little bit more. Until we have 684. Oops, now I have too much. There we go, 684. Pour the water into your big bucket. And get out your wooden spoon and stir it up. And I'm looking at my numbers here, doing the math in my head because I'm not following the recipe that I have written here. So let me just do the math. I'm going to need 5 more grams of all-purpose flour. So let me get 5 more grams. There we go. And it will be very thick this right now. And you will be using your muscles to stir this. Once you get it stirred up pretty good, just scrape off all the dough that you can off your spoon. It'll be very sticky, so don't worry, you're going to get dough stuck on your fingers. That's just how it is. And then you put the lid on and you leave it for about 25 to 30 minutes. So we're going to set the timer and we're going to walk away. Okay. So it's been 25 minutes. Now it's time for us to add in salt. So I'm going to turn on my scale here. Measure out 22 grams of salt, which is about a tablespoon, like a heaping tablespoon. Just a little bit more. There it is. 22 grams of salt, sprinkle it all over the top. Now, we're going to put some starter in. So take a bowl, a good sized bowl that has some hot water in it, and put it on your scale. Zero it out. Take your starter, and I use a starter. I've used it straight from the fridge. I don't make a special starter. This is my mother's starter. This is a thing that I keep alive indefinitely, and I just have enough of this that I can take it straight from here. I'm going to put 216 grams in this hot water. Oops, that's too much. There we go. So I'll take this and just scoop it out with your hand and put it in there. All right. Now, this is how, can you see the bowl? Yeah. Okay, now we're going to stir it. And I don't use a mixer. I use my hands. And using your hands is really good for getting a feel for the dough. if you use a mixer, you're not touching the dough with your hands. You get so much more information by stirring it up with your hands. You can see it, you can feel it, and you'll know the temperature of it, you'll know the consistency of it. So you have to plan on getting dirty. Your hands are going to get covered in dough, and some of it's not going to come off until you go to the sink. Make sure that you mix it up well enough that you don't have that the starter is well incorporated and the salt is incorporated.
Again, I didn't get it.
Okay, yeah, a very wet and sticky dough. And that's fine. Just stir it up good. All right. Once you think you've got it pretty good, I kind of try to scrape it a little bit off the sides. And then just try to pick off what you can from your hands. And put it back in the bowl, whatever you can get off, which may not be very much. And then you wash the rest off in the sink. And at this point, you put the lid back on and leave it on the counter. And set the timer for 20 minutes. Come back in 20 minutes and I will show you how to stretch and fold it. We're going to do the stretching and folding 3 or 4 times probably before 10 o'clock. And that's all the mixing that we do. So while we wait for that 20 minutes, I'm going to feed my mother starter so that we'll have some fresh for tomorrow. And to do that, I get my clean empty bowl here, and I put 250, at least for me, I like to keep about 500 grams of starter. So I'm going to get 250 grams, hopefully. Scrape out as much as you can. Alright, 250 grams of starter. Turn it to 0. Then generally speaking, you take what you have in your bowl and divide it by 2. So 250 divided by 2 is 125. So you would put 125 grams of flour and 125 grams of water. I like to keep my starter just a little bit thicker. So I'm going to put in 130 grams of flour, which was too much there. 130 grams of flour and 120 grams of water. I can measure the flour right into the same bowl that had the starter, because flour, you saw, I could take it out, not a problem. You can't take the water out as easily, and the water is a lot heavier than flour, and so I like to measure it separately. So I'm going to have 0 grams, I need 120 grams of water. Alright, pour that in. So I had 130 plus 120, so I have 250. That's 250 that was in the bowl, 250 added, so this is 500. Okay, 500 grams total in this bowl now. Stir it up really well. You want to get the big clumps out, make sure you don't have big clumps of flour. And then you scrape off what's left over on your spoon. Put the lid back on. And tomorrow, 12 hours from now, this will be ready to do some more cooking with, or whatever you want. You can leave it on the counter now, or you can put it in the fridge. You need to set the timer for 20 minutes to come back and show you how to stretch and fold this dough. All right, it's been 20 minutes. The dough looks like this. Now we're going to do something called stretch and fold. We're not going to use a mixer to mix this dough, but we're going to do something called stretch and fold, and stretching and folding will help develop the gluten structure in the bread. And rather than using flour on our hands, we are going to use water. If we put flour on our hands, we would be adding flour to the dough, and it would be getting thicker and thicker each time we did this, and we don't want that. So we're just going to have a bowl of water. I'm going to dip my fingers in it, stretch the dough, pull it from the outside edge, and put it in the middle. And just go around and around doing that. And if you put a little bit of water on your hands, it doesn't stick too bad. Gone all the way around. Now I'm just going to do it a little bit more. And you can see it's kind of turned into a ball. So I'm just going to sweep that around. Now I have a ball. And that's all you do for the first time. Put the lid back on. Set the timer for 20 minutes again. Okay, so it's been another 20 minutes. And we're going to do another stretch and fold. This is what our dough looks like now. So we're going to get your hands wet and pull from the outside into the center, stretching that dough. Going around, getting it good and tight in there. Pulling it into a nice little ball. There we are. All right. Put the lid back on and set the timer for 20 minutes. All right, it's been 20 minutes. Do this one more time with a little bit of water on the hands. Stretch and fold from the outside into the center. You'll feel it developing some resistance. The more as time passes and you do this more, you'll feel that it's starting to tear instead of stretch. It's starting to develop some gluten. And it's also becoming less sticky. So less of it will stick to your hands. And it will go into a tighter ball, a stiffer ball. So we're going to put this away until about 10 o'clock tonight, right before I go to bed. 10:30. I'll do that one more time right before bed. And then you just leave it on the counter until morning. So we'll come back in the morning and see what this looks like. All right, so we last fed and stretched and folded our dough last night. It was between 10 and 10:30 when I last touched it. And you can see how much bigger it is. It's over about 4 quarts, okay? So that's way bigger than it was when we went to bed last night. It's been about 10 hours. And you can also smell it. Of course, you can't smell it. But I can smell it. It smells delicious. And you can see there's a few bubbles starting to form. Maybe you can see those, I don't know. There's a few bubbles starting to form in here. We're going to leave it until about 10 o'clock though, so I'm going to put the lid back on. We're going to leave it here until about 10 when we will shape it into loaves. So we'll see if it grows further between now and then. Can you see the air bubbles in here? This has been almost 12 hours since we last touched this dough. And now it's risen up to well over 4 quarts, and it's got lots of little air bubbles, which is great. We want that. You can see how alive it really is. All those air bubbles are filled with carbon dioxide gas produced by the yeast as they munch away on the carbohydrates in there. All right, so now it's been almost 12 hours since we did anything to our dough. You can see even in the last couple of hours it has continued to rise. You can see all the little bubbles in it, and we're also seeing evidence of bubbles on top. I'll show you this. So you can see in here little bubbles that look like they're going to explode, right? Those are still more trapped gases from the yeast. The trick when forming your loaves is to not push out all that air. You want to keep those gases in the dough, and it takes a lot of skill and practice, and I don't have all that I need to be able to do a really good job, but I will teach you a few tricks, hopefully, that I've learned that help make a good bread, even if I'm not really, you know, a French chef. Okay, baking bread is called a bulk fermentation. You have a giant wad of dough in a big bowl, and you leave it there for many hours and let the yeast work their magic. That's called bulk fermentation. And how to know when to move to the next step is kind of tricky. If you're in a spot that's really warm, you might need to do it much sooner. I've done it as soon as 8 o'clock in the morning in the summer times here when it's quite warm. Right now it's winter, but we do have a heater in our house. So for me, I can tell this is about the right time because I can see all these bubbles and the bubbles on top. But I don't want to have these bubbles on top be popping all over the place. Okay, then it's been too long. You want to capture it while the yeast are still really active, all right? Don't wait until they've eaten all there is to eat and now they're full and going to sleep. You want to capture them, the process while it's really vigorous. So we're going to put a little bit of flour on the counter. And the really good bakery people don't use hardly any flour for this. You can also try just putting water on the counter. You want to do something that's not going to add too much flour to it. So now we're going to dump it. See all those bubbles on the bottom? We're going to dump that out onto the counter. You might have to encourage it a little bit with your hands. And then scrape out the rest that's in here. You don't want to waste it. Look at all those bubbles. Those are beautiful. Right. Something that you really would probably want to have for this is a bench scraper. A bench scraper will help you a lot to keep the dough off your hands. So I'm going to actually rinse my hands a little bit here. Once you start getting sticky dough all over your hands, it's going to be difficult to make a beautiful shaped loaf because it's just going to stick to you. So learning how to handle it as little as possible is key. Alright, so you use the bench scraper to help with that. Get a little flour on it. And we're trying to make this into something symmetrical because I'm going to cut it in half. Alright, so this is kind of symmetrical here. I'm going to cut this in half and put a little bit of flour down the middle because I'm going to make 2 loaves. You see how jiggly that is? That's beautiful. Alright. Now I'm going to kind of weigh it to get an idea to make sure I don't have 2 loaves that are too unequal. 2. Yeah. Almost exactly, only 1 gram difference. Wow, I never get that close. Okay, so now you have 2 blobs here, and you've got to try and shape them into rounds, okay? And the trick of shaping is to develop a skin on the outside, okay? So you're taking the part that's been in the flour on the counter, and you're stretching around that and putting it into the center that was on the top, okay? And you can use your bench scraper to help you do that. So you're pulling it from the top now and pushing it into the bottom. And you're kind of rolling along the counter. See, there's a big, huge bubble. Try to trap that if you can, but that's just too big. Try not to push out all the air. There's still lots of bubbles in there, okay? Now I have 2 different ways that we're going to form these loaves. This one is going to rise in an 8-inch pan, a cake pan. And I'm putting these strips of parchment paper here to make it easier to get it out when it's done. All right. And for that, we are going to put it with the seam side down. Oh, my hands are too sticky now. We're going to put it seam side down in the pan. Okay, now it's going to go there. The other one I have this bowl for, and this is made out of, I guess, cane or reeds, whatever. Some kind of natural material. It's woody. And I make sure there's lots of flour in here, okay? And there's a few chunks from the last time, so I'm dumping out the chunks because they're dried up and they won't be yummy on my new loaf of bread. So plenty of flour. All right, take my second dough blob. Remember, the flour is all on the bottom, so we're going to turn it up this way. And use our dough scraper to help us make it into a circle and stretch the dough from the top around to the bottom. Now, this is beautiful because the dough will come out with some circles on top if you do it right. I still am struggling with that. So this will be the top of the bread. So the top part's going to need to go down. So this part goes in upside down compared to the other loaf. It goes this way. All right. So this is all scraggly on top and this is smoother, but that's fine because when we move them into their ovens to cook, they're going to be different ways, okay? So we're going to have to cover them, but I need to wash my hands first. So after you form these loaves, you don't want them to get all dried out. You want to keep as much moisture in there as you can, so you need to cover them. So one of them, I'm just going to use this. Apparently this is supposed to go on the inside or something, but I just use it for a cover. I'm doing it all wrong, but whatever, it works. So I'm going to cover it with that. And then this one, I'm going to use a tea towel. I'm going to get it slightly damp. Some people call these flour sack towels, tea towels, but they're not cotton loops, okay? You don't want to have terry cloth. You'll have a bunch of fuzz in your bread. You don't want that. So this is damp, and I'm going to put it over this. You can also use plastic wrap. Sometimes if you use plastic wrap, you want to spray it with some oil, like from Pam or something first. Now, the beauty of sourdough is that the timeline is very flexible. If you get to this point and you're like, oh no, I forgot, my kid has a doctor's appointment, oh no, and you don't know when you're going to make it back, at this point you can put these in the fridge and leave them. You could leave them in there overnight again if you wanted to. But be aware that in doing so, you're changing the things that are dominating in your bacterials and all the microorganisms. So right now, it's mostly about yeast. But when you put it in the fridge, the yeast goes to sleep and the bacteria pick up. And the bacteria provide that wonderful sour taste that we've come to expect in sourdough. And if you put them in the fridge, you'll get more and more of that the longer it stays in the fridge. And if you like that, great, do it. If that's not what you're looking for, then you want to stay on top of this and not just put it in the fridge and walk away. And there's other ways to make it rise faster, to even shorten that even more. But for now, we're going to leave these on the counter the rest of the morning, probably come back to it about 1 o'clock in the afternoon. All right, so just leave them right there. Okay, so it's almost 1 o'clock right now. So we've had these sitting and rising for almost 3 hours. And we're going to take a look and see how they've been doing. And you can see it's come up quite a bit on these. Oh, this is not good. Yeah, so they've risen a lot. So they're almost ready to go in the oven. We have to preheat the oven now. On days when it's really cold and if it's winter and feels like this just isn't doing anything, you can turn your oven on a really low temperature. I have a proofing setting on my oven, and sometimes in the winter I will put these in the oven on the proof setting to help encourage them to rise. Or you can put them in a warm place, like on top of your refrigerator if you have a spot there, or some other place in your house that's just a little warmer than room temperature. But you don't want it to be hot because you can't start cooking it. All right, so we're gonna put our oven on, and we're gonna put our pots in the oven at the same time to preheat. So I like to cook these loaves in really heavy heat retaining with lids. So this is a Dutch oven with a lid, and I have a whole bunch of different Dutch ovens, and I've tried them all, and this is the one that works the best for me. I also have this pot that's made for bread specifically, and it works really well too, but it's much less dense. It doesn't retain the heat quite as well as the Dutch oven. I don't think it seals quite as well either, but it works great. It makes a nice loaf. It has because it's rounded on the bottom, it really makes it big. So we're going to put these in the oven at the same time. We're going to preheat the oven to 425 degrees for almost an entire hour. No matter what the oven says, just because it says it's preheated, keep it going. You have to get these things up to temperature too, not just the oven thermometer. So I'm going to turn that on now and come back when the oven's ready. Alright, so the oven has been preheating for a solid hour. So I'm going to take out the Dutch oven and the stoneware pot and put the loaves in, which is going to be interesting. So this is the one that I'm going to put this loaf in. Hopefully it'll just come right out of here and go in. My problem is this, I always get it kind of on the side. It's not very straight. So we get that in there, excuse me, and we have to score the top so that when this goes in the oven and all the water starts to boil and cook inside there, the steam will escape in a controlled fashion. That's the idea with the scoring. Let's take this one out, put that back in. And this one is very hot, as you can see. And a lot of you don't have baskets like this, so you can let your dough rise in a pan like this and then use these strips of paper to lift it and set it in your pot. And you also score this one. And I just use a sharp knife. You can have special tools for this, but you don't need them. But you can see when I score it that there's an outer layer that's a little bit dry, and then the inside is very moist. So you can see there's a layer there. Put the lid on, put it back in the oven, set the timer for 25 minutes. The reason why we cook them inside another pan is to keep the moisture inside around the bread. So if you don't have something heavy with a lid that's heat proof, you can just cook it in your oven on maybe a stone that's been preheated, or just in a pan that's big enough, because it's going to rise more in the oven. So it has to be deep enough that it can rise more in the oven and not spill over the sides. This would not have worked. It would have spilled over. But if you do that, then be sure and put another pan on the bottom of your oven with water so that it can make steam. And that will help you have a really good crust on your bread. And now we're going to take the lids off of our pots. Obviously, the bread is not done. So we're going to leave it in here for another 25 minutes, maybe 30 minutes to finish cooking. The timer's gone off, and we're going to look and see how our bread is doing. Now I use convection oven, and so I do convect bake, and that helps, but you can see that it's more done on one side than the other. Oops, dump that out, and you can see how pale that is on the bottom, so I'm going to put that back in for a couple more minutes just by itself. And I'm going to turn it so that the less cooked side is toward the back, because that's where the heat comes from in my fan. And let's check this one. This one has the paper on the bottom of it. I'll get that out later. This is a lot more done on the bottom, you can see, and it's because it had the cast iron to cook in. So, but I think I will put it in for a couple minutes like this. So we'll just set the timer for 3 more minutes. It's really difficult to burn bread. It should be very dark on top. You don't want it to be light at all. And I found that with my ovens and the way I cook, that I need to keep the heat just slightly lower so that it cooks all the way through. When I do it too warm, the middle doesn't get cooked all the way before the outside is too dark. So then when I go to slice it, it's kind of gummy and it kind of makes a lot of gooey crumbs. So I turned the heat down and I'm going to cook it just a couple minutes longer, and I think that'll work just fine. Alright, here's the 3 extra minutes, and look at that. That is beautiful. Some people would say it could cook even longer, but I think that's perfect. We'll know when we cut into it. You can see the difference in the loaves, in the shape. This one was cooked in the Dutch oven, and this one was cooked in the stone, and you can tell the shape of it. The stoneware pot has a lot more rounded sides, and it's smaller. The bottom flat part is smaller. The Dutch oven has a much bigger flat surface, and it makes for a loaf that is bigger, round, and flatter. And I could cook these loaves on my stone. I have a nice baking stone that I could heat and put these on, but they would just spread out and be even flatter. So these loaves I like to cook inside containers for 2 reasons. 1, so they shape nicely, and 2, so that the steam stays inside and gives you this beautiful crust. Look at that. One of the things that happens as soon as you put the bread in the oven, it rises even more, and that's what we call oven spring. And the oven spring happens when the moisture inside the bread starts to steam and it has to escape. And you can see that it came up through the scoring that I made. And you have this beautiful like peeling back happening, particularly in this one where it had a rounded sides and it was smaller on the bottom. This one also had good oven spring, but it wasn't quite as fancy looking as this because it was wider. So we'll cut into these when they cool off. If you cut into them right now, you'll burn your hands and ruin the loaf. Let it cool a little bit, and we'll look at the insides in a while. Okay, our bread has cooled enough that we're going to slice it, but before we do, I'm going to point out this loaf right here. You can see the flour circles. That's because it rose inside this basket. So that's one of the, I don't know, it's just to make it beautiful. It doesn't have to have that. But I'm still trying to figure out how to get it to go into the pot like straight. But it's all right. And then this one is the one that had the paper strips on it that we lifted and set into the Dutch oven. And you can see there's a couple little spots where there's still some paper stuck in there, but it won't hurt anyone if you don't get it all out, but that is one of the drawbacks of doing it that way. But this is a very sticky dough. I don't know any other way that you could lift it. It's so sticky, I don't think you could just do that without having something like that. Okay, so let's cut this one, and we'll see what it looks like on the inside. This is a very crispy crust, and it sometimes can be hard to cut. You need a really sharp knife. By the next day, it will be much softer because you'll have eaten half of it and put the other half in a plastic bag. So here's the inside. You can see the holes in there. That's a good sign of a good loaf of bread. Smells delicious. You can see the crust, nice and crispy on the outside. And you just put some butter on here. Watch it melt because it's still warm. Ugh. If you like jam or something, you can do that. A lot of times when this bread is still fresh and crispy and it's hard to cut, I'll do it like this. Turn it up on its side and cut this way until I can at least get it started. Sometimes I think that it's better just to rip it. There you go. It looks like, I think it's done in the middle. It might not be done all the way in the middle. It just feels kind of, maybe it just has to sit longer and cool more. But it does have some really great bubble holes in there. So enjoy your bread. This is all you do is store it in a plastic bag. Once it's all the way cool, don't put it in a plastic bag until it's cool completely, or you'll end up with condensation and wet bread, and that's disgusting. So let it cool all the way, then put it in a plastic bag, and the next day it will be much softer, like this. This is my bread from yesterday, and you can totally cut that. Now that it's been in a plastic bag, it won't be hard to cut at all. But when it's fresh, I really like that crunchy crust. Enjoy!